At our engagement party, my mother-in-law took the ring off my finger and said, "This belongs to a real woman, not a gold digger who couldn't even pay for her own dress." My fiancé just stood there. I looked at him and whispered, "Say something." He didn't. But my sister did, and what she said changed everything. Here's the thing, I thought I was living a fairy tale. I was engaged to this guy, Jonah, who seemed perfect for me. Our engagement party was supposed to be the start of a new chapter in our lives. It was a lovely evening with our friends and family gathered together. But then, in front of everyone, his mother completely humiliated me, took the engagement ring off my finger, and called me a gold digger. Jonah didn't defend me. He just stood there, doing nothing. I looked at him and whispered, "Say something." But instead, it was my sister who stood up and said the one thing that changed everything. The night started off with so much promise. Jonah and I had been together for 2 years, and after months of planning, we were finally celebrating our engagement. We had chosen a small, cozy venue in the heart of Laurel Creek, a place that Jonah's family had been going to for years. The entire place was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and candlelight, the kind of setting you'd expect in a romance movie. The ring he gave me was gorgeous, passed down through generations in his family. It wasn't the biggest or most expensive, but it had a history, a sentimental value. I'd always felt like I was in love with the idea of us, our shared dreams, our shared values. I never once thought that night would be the beginning of the end. Jonah's family was kind, or so I thought. His father, Charles, was a banker, serious but warm in his own way. His mother, Margaret, on the other hand, was something else entirely. Margaret was the kind of woman who seemed perfect on the outside, always in control, always polished. But I had never been able to shake the feeling that there was something a little too sharp about her. The entire evening was filled with well wishes, congratulatory hugs, and laughter. The place was lively, and I had hoped this would be the beginning of something beautiful. I even felt like I had earned my place in this family. After all, I was marrying their son, right? But the cracks began to show earlier than I could have imagined. Margaret cornered me by the bar midway through the evening. She greeted me with that signature tight smile of hers. "It's such a lovely party, dear," she said, but her eyes were already scanning me, the way she always did. "You look nice tonight." "Thank you, Margaret," I said, my smile wavering under the weight of her scrutinizing gaze. Her eyes briefly flicked over my dress, then back to my face. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," she began, a little too sweetly, "but we really need to talk about the wedding. You know, the details matter, especially with the family's reputation. We wouldn't want anything unsuitable to make an appearance." I froze for a moment, trying to mask the discomfort rising inside me. I had saved up every penny to buy the dress I was wearing, a simple but elegant midnight blue number, something that suited me perfectly. It wasn't the most expensive, but it was beautiful in its own way. Yet I could tell, even from the way Margaret looked at it, she didn't think much of it. "I'm sure we'll work out the details," I said, trying to keep my tone light. But there was a coldness in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. The night went on, and I thought I had managed to push the unease aside. Jonah and I mingled with friends, thanking everyone for their support, posing for pictures. But I felt it again, that nagging sense that something wasn't right. After Jonah gave his little speech about how lucky we were to have such supportive families, I thought things would settle into a more comfortable rhythm. But then, Margaret stepped forward, just as the crowd began to gather for the toast. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for a moment," she said loudly, cutting through the buzz of conversation. I felt the air grow still, the way it does right before a storm hits. "There's something that's been bothering me, and I think it's time we clear the air." I could already feel my stomach tighten. I glanced at Jonah, who was standing next to me. He looked pale, unsure. I knew right then that I was in trouble. Margaret stepped closer, her gaze fixed on me. "I just don't think this is right," she said, her voice calm but cutting. This engagement, this marriage. It doesn't feel right. She paused, looking me up and down, before continuing, this ring, this whole thing, it belongs to a real woman, someone who's earned it, someone who has class. The room seemed to freeze. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, my throat dry. I looked at Jonah, hoping he would speak, hoping he would defend me. But he didn't. He just stood there, looking at his mother with wide eyes, his face expressionless. Margaret's gaze turned cold as she reached for my left hand. Without a word, she took the ring off my finger. "This is for someone who deserves it," she said, holding it up to the crowd like it was a trophy. "Not a gold digger who couldn't even pay for her own dress." I was speechless. My breath caught in my throat, my hands shaking as I looked from Margaret to Jonah. I couldn't believe what was happening. I tried to speak, to demand an explanation, but nothing came out. Instead, I turned to Jonah, my eyes wide with desperation, and whispered, "Say something." He just stood there. Didn't say a word. His face was pale, his mouth slightly agape, but there was nothing behind his eyes. I felt a knot of rage and hurt twist inside me. How could he let this happen? How could he just stand there and do nothing? But then, something unexpected happened. My sister Natalie, who had been standing quietly by the buffet table, stepped forward. She had been calm the entire evening, keeping to herself for the most part, but now, there was a fire in her eyes that I had never seen before. "Hey, what the hell is wrong with you?" Natalie's voice rang out across the room, low but sharp. It was a direct shot at Margaret. The room went completely silent as everyone turned to look. Margaret narrowed her eyes, but Natalie didn't back down. "No, seriously," she continued. "You think you can just walk in here and treat my sister like that? In front of everyone? You don't get to do that." Jonah, who had been frozen beside me, looked at his mother, then back at me, his face full of guilt. But it wasn't enough. "Mom, I didn't," he started to say, but Margaret cut him off. "Stay out of this, Jonah," she snapped, her tone sharp and dismissive. But Natalie wasn't having it. She turned to Jonah, her voice now hard as stone. "You're letting her do this? You're letting her humiliate the woman you're supposed to marry?" Jonah faltered, his face going pale. I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice cracking. "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before you let your mom tear into her like that," Natalie shot back. "Maybe you should have stood up for her." There was a long, agonizing pause as everyone waited for Jonah's response. But all I could feel was the cold, empty silence between us. I had waited for him to defend me, to say something, but he didn't. It was like he was paralyzed, unable to move, unable to act. Finally, I spoke, barely able to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Jonah, you should have said something." But it was too late. I knew it. He didn't understand. And it hurt more than anything I could have imagined. The night dragged on after that. Jonah and I left the party early, both of us silent in the car, the weight of everything hanging between us. I tried to make sense of it all, but the truth was too clear: he hadn't defended me. He hadn't stood up for us. As we walked into his apartment, I felt the distance between us grow with every step. I couldn't even look at him. Not after everything that had happened. "Can we talk about this?" Jonah asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. But I didn't want to talk. Not yet. Not when I felt like he had abandoned me when I needed him most. I just stared at him, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what to say to you." Jonah looked crushed, but the hurt I felt was deeper than anything his apology could fix. I had expected him to be my partner, to defend me. But in that moment, I realized that I wasn't sure who he was anymore. My sister Natalie had been my strength that night, but the cracks in my relationship with Jonah had already begun to show. And I wasn't sure they could be fixed. Not anymore. And the hardest part? I wasn't sure I even wanted to try anymore. We drove home in silence, Jonah glancing over at me every so often, as though expecting me to say something. But I couldn't bring myself to speak. Every time I opened my mouth, I felt like the words would fall apart before they could reach him. I had 100 things I wanted to say, but none of them seemed to matter anymore. Not when the one thing that mattered most, the one person I needed, was standing there doing nothing. I could feel the tension between us, thick and suffocating. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. How had things gotten this bad? How had Jonah's mother been able to humiliate me so openly, and why had he just let it happen? We pulled into the parking lot of his apartment, and I didn't wait for him to open the door for me. I got out and walked straight to the entrance, leaving Jonah behind to follow me, if he even intended to. I didn't care. I was done trying to maintain composure. Inside, the apartment felt colder than usual, like the walls themselves had absorbed the tension from the night. I set my purse down on the counter, but my hands were still trembling. I didn't want to cry, but the tears were already threatening to break through, the hurt too much to carry without letting it go. Jonah walked in behind me, closing the door gently. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Can we please talk? Jonah's voice was quieter now, softer, but there was still that undercurrent of guilt in it. I turned to him, my eyes searching his face, but all I saw was uncertainty. The man I thought I knew, the one I thought would always have my back, was nowhere to be found. And that hurt more than anything Margaret had said. "You didn't defend me," I whispered, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. "You didn't say a word when your mother, when she took my ring off my finger and called me a gold digger." "I didn't know what to do," he said, his voice faltering. "She's my mom, Anne. And I'm your fiance." I cut him off, my voice rising. "You don't choose her over me, Jonah. Not in front of everyone. Not when she's tearing me down like that. You should have said something. Anything." His silence only deepened the pit in my stomach. He ran his fingers through his hair, looking defeated. I didn't want to make things worse. I didn't know what to say to her. I couldn't process that. "You didn't know what to say?" I repeated, as if the words themselves would make sense to me. "You didn't know that you should stand up for the person you're about to marry? You didn't know that was the one thing you should have done, no matter what?" Jonah took a step toward me, his face filled with regret. "I never meant for this to happen. I didn't know how to handle it. I thought if I said something, she'd make things even worse. You don't understand how she is." "Oh, I understand just fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're terrified of her. You'd rather let her walk all over me than risk upsetting her." His face dropped. I saw the truth in it, the guilt eating at him. But it wasn't enough. The more he stood there, the less I saw of the man I thought I was going to marry. The man I thought was my partner in all of this. "You're right," Jonah finally said, his voice barely audible. "I am terrified of her. She's my mother, and I've spent my whole life trying to make her happy. But I didn't think. I didn't think about you. I didn't think about how this would hurt you. I should have stood up for you. I should have said something." I felt a lump form in my throat. His apology didn't feel like enough. I wanted to believe him, to accept that he was genuinely sorry, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just a glimpse of something much bigger. "This isn't just about that night, Jonah," I said, my voice trembling. "It's about how you've let her control everything. It's about how you let her make the decisions in our lives. This isn't just one bad moment. It's who you are when it comes to her. And I can't keep pretending that's okay." Jonah's eyes widened, like I had struck him with a blow he hadn't expected. "What do you mean?" I shook my head, not sure how to explain it all. "I mean that I've spent the last 2 years trying to fit into your world. I've tried so hard to be accepted by your family. But every time I take a step forward, she pulls me back. Every time I think we're making progress, she pushes me down. And you just let her. I can't keep living like this. Jonah took a step back, his face pale. I never meant for you to feel like that. I didn't know. That's the problem, I said quietly. You didn't know. You never saw how she treated me. You never noticed how she's been making me feel small. And when it mattered the most, when she humiliated me in front of everyone, you just stood there and let it happen. I could see it in his face. The regret. The realization. But also something else. Something deeper. A fear of confronting his mother. A fear of standing up to the woman who had shaped him, who had controlled his life in ways I never fully understood. I don't know what to do, then, Jonah admitted, his voice cracking. I don't know how to fix this. Maybe you don't, I said softly. Maybe this is something only you can fix with her, but I can't keep waiting for you to choose me over her. I need to know that when the going gets tough, you'll choose us. Not just your mom. Not just her opinion. You need to choose me, Jonah. You need to choose our future. There was a long silence between us as Jonah stood frozen, his eyes darting from me to the floor, trying to make sense of my words. I could feel the distance growing, an invisible wall rising between us that I couldn't break down no matter how hard I tried. And I realized, as the minutes stretched on, that maybe the distance wasn't something I could fix. Maybe it was already too late. But I wasn't sure yet. I wasn't ready to give up completely. The next few days felt like a blur. Jonah and I barely spoke. I could feel him retreating into himself, unsure of what to do next. He kept apologizing over and over again, but it felt hollow. The damage had been done, and I wasn't sure if it was reparable. Margaret, meanwhile, never acknowledged what had happened. She acted like nothing had changed. I saw her at a family gathering a few days later, and she didn't even look at me. She didn't apologize for her cruel words. She didn't even seem to care. And that, more than anything, made me realize just how deeply this had affected me. Jonah was caught in the middle. I knew he loved me, he had to, right? But I also knew that his mother had been the primary woman in his life for so long that I couldn't simply expect him to choose me over her without a fight. But was I willing to wait for him to fight? The days after the engagement party felt like an emotional roller coaster. Jonah and I had barely spoken beyond the obligatory exchanges. Each time I saw him, I was reminded of how he had failed me when I needed him most. I couldn't shake the images of that night, the humiliation, the way Margaret took my ring off my finger as though I was nothing, the hollow apology Jonah had offered. It was as though he thought saying sorry was enough, but nothing was truly resolved. He hadn't understood how deeply his inaction had hurt me. Margaret, of course, never once acknowledged what she'd done. As the days passed, it was clear that she was more interested in maintaining control than in admitting any wrongdoing. She carried on as though nothing had happened, carrying on with her life as if I didn't even exist. The silence was suffocating. Jonah, meanwhile, seemed torn between me and his mother. He kept apologizing, but I couldn't bring myself to believe that his apologies were sincere. He hadn't stood up for me then, and I wasn't sure if he ever would. His silence spoke volumes, and every time he spoke of fixing things, it felt like he was making excuses, trying to reconcile with both his family and me, but never fully committing to either side. I didn't want to be in the middle of a tug-of-war. I deserved more than that. Then, one evening, I had a moment of clarity. It wasn't about being vindictive or about holding on to the pain for too long, it was about taking control of my own life again. I needed to make a choice for myself, one that didn't involve Jonah's hesitance or Margaret's cruelty. It was late when Jonah came to my apartment, his hands trembling as he knocked on the door. I had been expecting this moment, but when it came, I didn't know how I would feel. Part of me was still angry. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to let him know how much he had disappointed me. But I was done fighting a battle for someone who wasn't willing to fight for me. When I opened the door, Jonah looked like he hadn't slept in days. His face was pale, his eyes red from lack of rest. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice small, almost like a plea. "I've been thinking about everything. About you. About how I failed you." I let him in, but I wasn't sure what I was hoping for anymore. He sat down on the couch, and I followed, sitting across from him. The silence stretched between us, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just necessary. "I've been thinking too," I said, my voice steady. "About us, about what happened, about the way you just stood there when your mom humiliated me." Jonah's eyes dropped to the floor. I know. I know I should have said something, but I didn't. I just froze, and I hate myself for that. "I'm so sorry." I nodded, but it wasn't enough anymore. It had been enough for the past few weeks, but I had reached my limit. The apologies, the guilt, the endless back and forth, it wasn't fixing anything. "Jonah," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I've been waiting for you to choose me. I've been waiting for you to choose us over her, over the life she controls. But the truth is, I'm tired. I'm tired of being in the middle of your world and her world. I can't do it anymore." He looked up at me, panic flashing in his eyes. "No, please don't say that. I love you. I want us to work." I took a deep breath, then looked at him squarely. "I loved you, Jonah. I really did. But love isn't enough when there's no trust, no respect. I can't keep holding on to something that isn't there anymore." There was a long, painful silence. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the realization that I wasn't going to bend to his will, that I wasn't going to stay in a relationship that had become suffocating. And for the first time, I saw him for what he really was, a man who was still trying to please his mother more than he was trying to protect the woman he loved. I stood up, my heart racing as I made the decision I had been avoiding for so long. "Jonah, I think it's time we end this. I need to move on. I need to find someone who will choose me, who will stand by me no matter what." His face twisted in pain. "Please, don't do this. We can fix it. I'll make it right." I shook my head. "It's not just about making it right. It's about the fact that you didn't do anything when it mattered. I can't keep waiting for you to wake up, Jonah. I deserve someone who will choose me first." As I walked to the door, I glanced back one last time. "Goodbye, Jonah." He didn't stop me. He didn't say anything else. He just sat there, his shoulders slumped, and I realized then that the man I had loved was already gone. The person I had hoped he could be was never going to show up. And I wasn't going to waste any more time waiting for him. The weeks that followed were difficult but necessary. The first few days felt like an emotional storm, raw and painful, but I slowly began to piece myself back together. I spent more time with my family, especially Natalie. She was my rock, the one person who always had my back. She never hesitated to stand up for me when I couldn't. And with her support, I started to heal. One day, about a month after the engagement party, I received a call from Margaret. I hadn't expected to hear from her. After everything that had happened, I thought she would have stayed silent, content in her power. But I was wrong. "Can we talk?" Her voice was as cold as I remembered, but there was something different about it this time. She wasn't speaking down to me. She wasn't attacking me. She was asking. I hesitated for a moment, my heart still sore from everything that had transpired. But I agreed to meet. I needed closure, and I needed to see if there was any chance of moving forward, even if that meant doing so without Jonah. We met at a quiet cafe, the same one where I had first met Jonah's family. Margaret was already sitting at a table, her posture rigid, but there was a weariness in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I know things between us have been strained." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened at your engagement party. And I know I was wrong," Margaret admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "I've been trying to hold on to control for too long, and in doing so, I pushed you away. I don't want to lose my son, but I also don't want to lose you." I stared at her, the words catching me off guard. This wasn't the Margaret I knew, the woman who had been so cold and dismissive. This was a different side of her, one I hadn't seen before. "I don't know if Jonah and I will ever be able to repair what's been broken," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But I can't keep holding on to the past. I've made my peace with it. I need to move forward." Margaret took a deep breath. "I understand. And I'm sorry for what I did. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I respect your decision." And just like that, I realized something: I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need Jonah's either. I had taken control of my own life, and I was moving forward. I had learned that standing up for myself wasn't just about fighting back, it was about walking away from what didn't serve me, and choosing a future where I could thrive. Months later, I was a different person. I had started a new chapter in my life, focusing on my career, my friends, and most importantly, my own happiness. The pain from the past had faded, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. And as for Jonah? He eventually reached out, but I had moved on. I had forgiven him, not for him, but for me. I wasn't angry anymore, but I knew that I deserved more than what he could offer. In the end, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The best kind of revenge was living well. And that's exactly what I was doing.